I just recently found out about Manarino's setup, which has got to be the most craziest.
Yeah, I strung for him at United Cup last year.
Is it the same sort of setup?
Yeah, he was using an old Aero, and it was I had to string for him, I think it was 9.5 kilos, which is like 20 pounds or something, whatever it is.
So tension of 20.
Yeah, and it was one of the...
So common for people who don't understand that would be common tension is about 50.
So put it this way, between his racket... Actually, hang on, who did I string for? So I strung for Novak this year as well at United Cup. His racket was like 64, 65.
Okay.
And then like Storm was in the 44, 46 area, right? So Manarino's restring fits in between the two of them as a whole nother tension. That's the big difference between those two. He's a whole nother restring.
Welcome to another episode of Going Pro, and today we have Stephan Mikhail, who is the National Equipment Lead at Tennis Australia, working at Tennis Lab. So essentially you're an equipment technician and consultant. You string rackets and you're the equipment consultant at Grand Slam level, ATP, WTA, ITF, and you're a Pro Tour stringer. Huge role. I'm super just stoked to have you here and super interested because this is an area that I don't really know much about, and through my tennis journey I wasn't really informed about equipment and strings and how that can actually elevate performance. And once you get to a certain level, you're just always looking for 1%ers and things that can just elevate your game to the next level. So yeah, thanks for coming down, and I'm really pumped for this one today.
No, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's really good to do this chat with you and get some stuff out there. Equipment's something that people don't really look at in tennis. It's really overlooked. You look at other sports, they're so into it. You look at cycling, golf, swimming with the wetsuits, like all that kind of stuff. In tennis, it's like the last thing. So doing what we do is pretty interesting. You start to find out certain things that you're probably told while you're getting coached or playing that you're like, hang on, that actually is not right. So yeah.
100%. Like the analytics and the equipment side, that hasn't been a big thing only till recently. We're talking off camera about just like how analytics started to come into play with the work of Grigor Dimitrov, who's kind of spearheaded that forward. And now kind of a little bit more awareness of equipment. How recently has this started to pick up and people started taking it more seriously? Yeah,
so Tennis Lab started probably maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It originally came from a university study with a partnership with Victoria University. So they wanted to find out, can tennis players improve through equipment, whether it's string, racket, or spec changes? Like we mentioned before, like other sports are doing that already. So they ran this massive survey using a Hawkeye court, benchmarking people with their current racket versus different rackets, different strings, different setups. And then we measured spin, speed, control, and then found that 80% of those players improved with some kind of change.
That's great. So this only just started from a university degree and then became a thing because of that.
Yeah,
a university kind of like study.
Yeah, so there was a university study put in partnership with Tennis Australia.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the Tennis Lab began. So my manager, Lyndon, who was doing his PhD at the time, we had a couple of other people in there, and they kind of started it. I wasn't part of that team at that point in time. But yeah, that's kind of how it started. And it was only really for our Aussie players for a few years. They could come in, they could test. And probably in the last 2 years, we've been open to the public as well.
Is this something that is also worldwide? Like, is this started in different parts of the world where people are really got into the study of equipment and how that actually affects performance in tennis?
I think the brands kind of do it in closed doors. There's some brands that may have a smart court, or they may do things with like big players or players that they see as pretty influential. But in terms of other places doing what we do, we're one of the only places that has a permanent Hawkeye court. There's no one else looking at equipment like what we do. And most of the time, like as you know, players will want to try a new racket or something, and it's feel-based. So you go out on court, hit, you might have an incredible day and go, that's it, I'm using this. Or you might have a terrible day and you go, nah, this isn't for me, but it could actually be performing better. You just don't like the feel of it.
That's super interesting. How did you actually get on this journey? So where did your journey in tennis kind of like lead you to a point to become an equipment technician?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I didn't grow up in a tennis family or anything like that. I started tennis really late, saw it on TV like everyone does during the Aussie Open, watched Federer, kind of was like, oh, maybe I'll give this a go. Went down to the local club and just kind of started from there. Again, like everybody else has that dream of being a tennis player. Tried that, got to the point where I was a bit realistic with it and go, am I going to play futures and play qualies week in, week out and grind like that? And decided not to, and got a job at Tennis Australia in, different areas, participation-based roles where it's trying to grow the sport. But while playing, it's quite funny, I became very obsessed with equipment in terms of what players were using and why they were using it, because I was trying to get better quicker. So I was trying to find this little cheat or something because I started so late, right? And I only noticed it because one of my favourite players, and this is a random player, but one of my favourite players was John Isner, because I had a big serve, I like to slap my forehand, and I've got a massive foot. My shoe size is a 15, and his foot size is massive, right? So, and he moves quite well on court. So I'm going, all right, my footwork's crap. This guy's massive. He's got the same shoe size. And I met him at 1AO before I worked at tennis. And I asked him what his shoe size was, and I think he was a 14. So I was like, okay, this guy can move. So there's no excuse for me, right? I'm a lot shorter than that guy. We've just got the same shoe size, so like actually get on court and practice. But I noticed he used to use a racket that was pretty famous by Sharapova, the Prince 03 white, which had the white holes in it. And 1AO, Prince changed the racket to this X03 black, which should have grey square holes in the side of the frame. And I looked at his racket and I'm like, why is it all black? There's no grey holes in it, and the holes are round. So that AO, he was signing some stuff. I was at a practice court watching him practice, and he was signing some stuff for me. And I said to him, I'm like, why are the holes round? Like, why don't you have the grey? And he just said, the old one just painted. Just gave me that line. And that opened up a can of worms for me.
Because you didn't know before that point that like that's what actually players do. They're using the old, but just with paint jobs and all of that.
No, had no idea. So I just always thought it's just what's on the shelf, like, pretty naive to it. I was probably 15 at that time, 16. And then from there, I started like obsessing with what players are using, just watching equipment. So I'd watch tennis and watch their shoes or watch their rackets, and you start to pick up shapes and frames, and you go, that's not that frame, that's this frame. Or, you even watch Roger or Rafa, their shoes aren't the shoes that they sell. For example, if you zoomed in on Roger's shoe, and this is stuff that I just pick up, the sole of his Nike shoes used to be flat and have little dimpled holes in them, and he'd have a carbon fiber plate in the center of the shoe. You go and buy a Vapor 9.5, it doesn't come like that.
This guy's the Rain Man of tennis equipment. Holy shit.
Yeah, stuff like that. Like, you just start to look at stuff, or Rafa's shoe even now.
Yeah.
It looks like the one on the shelf, but it's not. Or there was a picture the other day of Alcaraz at the AO.
Yeah.
His shoe's just the old Vapor from a couple of years ago, the low one. It's just paint. It just looks like the current one that they're going to use. It's got the plastic on the side. It's a different color. So you look at his shoe, same color as Mercedes' shoe, same colors, different shoe.
It's so important to really stick with what you really like, because even for me, the transition of the E-zones that have gone through the model, I really love the old 2020 model, and then the model before that, the 2019, I think the first one that came out in the blue and the black. And I've just been trying to get my hands on those, because the newer models for me, I've just tried to use them. And they just feel so much worse for me, and I don't know the difference behind it. And that's something that I'm ignorant to know about. But I just know the previous models are so much better for me, and I'm trying to like stick to them and find them as much as possible. But it gets harder and harder to find.
Yeah, I think it's hard with that, because again, you don't know the performance differences, right? You're just hitting with them going, this doesn't feel as good. Brands are never going to make a racket that's worse than a previous one, right? Their goal is to innovate, make the rackets better. So, for example, like the 2020 model and the current one that's on the shelf, you'd notice the current one's like, I think it's like 1 mil thicker. It's a little bit stiffer.
As in the beam, the frame?
Beam,
yeah.
It's a little bit thicker through the throat. I think it's a little bit thicker through the racket head. So it's a little bit stiffer. So that generally should give you a bit more power.
It does. It's so much worse on ground strokes, but it feels nicer on serve and volleys.
Yeah. So for recreational players, right, you got to think about this from the point where the brands are trying to sell rackets to their everyday player. How many people can hit a ball like you can, or like a pro can? Not many, right? There's a bigger market in that recreational, intermediate, kind of area where those changes are actually really good for those people, because they'll hit with them and go, oh, it's way more powerful. I can hit with a bit more depth. It's not flying. And that's where they do that kind of stuff. So it just depends on the player.
So essentially, once you get to a high level, it all becomes irrelevant, and then it just becomes custom to what you actually like. You get the kind of racket made for you and your play style.
To a certain degree, but you'd be surprised. Like, if you ask a lot of players on tour, why are you using what you're using? They've got no idea. It'll be like, my coach told me to use it, or it's like Clubland. Why do you string at this tension? My coach told me 52 or 54, or, you look at most European players, and, some stringers might agree, they might not agree with me, but I've noticed like most of them string in kilos, most of them string their mains 1 kilo tighter than crosses. That's just something I've noticed. That's something that must happen culturally in tennis in those areas. It's just what people have kind of grown up with. Yeah,
100%. How did you actually start to get into that role? So you started fanballing over Isner. You started noticing a lot more. How did you actually start to get into the role where you're actually working with equipment with Tennis Lab?
Yeah, so Tennis Lab started, and I saw it, and I just knocked on the door one day and was like, hey, can I help out? I'll bump our rackets. At that point in time, we weren't doing, or Lyndon and the guys weren't doing any painting of rackets. So they would prep rackets, send them off, they would get blacked out, because the whole thing with what we do is we want no brand bias. So every racket that's tested by anyone on our court is blacked out. And even if you can tell what the brand is, you wouldn't be able to tell me which model it is, what weight it is, all that kind of stuff. So just knocked on the door one day and said, hey guys, can I help you? I'll come in my own time outside of my role. And they're like, yep. So I was just bumpering rackets for months. And just volunteering, and I did that for a few years outside of my role, and then eventually after a couple of years they said, we've got an opportunity for you to join the team, do you want to? And I jumped at it, and I've been doing that for a few years.
I love that. I love that you've just gone, I want this role, but I'm going to volunteer and work my way into it, rather than just knock on the door and expect that expect that you needed anything from that role.
Yeah, exactly. It was more of a hobby for me. I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed equipment, and I just wanted to get better at it. And I think with customizing in the industry, within stringing and customizing, because it's very old school, people are really protective. So I'd ask people, hey, can you teach me to customize? Hey, can you do this? And it's more like, oh, no, I don't want to teach you, because if you learn to do it, that's just another person that knows how to do it, and you're probably taking money away from me. So it's not, people aren't really willing to share. It's quite tough. So when I saw the door there, and I just was like, okay, I might be able to learn to customize in here. I can do some stuff, and that's kind of where it started.
100%. So today's podcast sponsor is Electric Road Agency, who were formerly 4RT. Now, if you want a team of strategists, designers, producers, creators who drive stories to tell your advertising and marketing needs, these guys are the best in the business. They've been extremely influential for us at ATA. They've driven our media game forward to new levels that we never knew that were possible. And they've done it with countless brands, big, small, it doesn't matter what the size. They just love telling your story. So they specialize in health, wellness, fitness, tourism, construction, and they are just the best in the business in creating adaptive solutions to find how to tell your brand, or how to discover your brand and tell that story. So highly, highly, highly recommend these guys. And if you want to get in touch, please go on electricroad.au or search the Instagram handle Electric Road Agency, and they will answer your email, your call, your DM, and they'll be in touch, and they'll be able to tell your story very well. Can you break down what you do in your role, the kind of different facets of what you do at Tennis Lab, and what's involved for the person that might not know anything about kind of equipment?
Yeah, so our team, so between Lyndon and I, we look after everything equipment based. So from courts, balls, rackets, stringing, players. So every day is different. So I could go from stringing a bunch of shop rackets to Dasher knocking on the door one day saying, hey, can you look at my equipment? I want a little bit more power. Or, hey, can I try this out? Or something like that. Or we might get new rackets from the brand. So I might be stringing and painting rackets, or traveling on tour at some of the pro tours you've seen me at. yeah, it's just very different every day. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to knock on the door and ask for something. Might be a junior player. Yeah.
So I want to dive into the specifics a little bit more. So I guess with this conversation today, I want to really dial into taking something away where we can understand a little bit more about important strings that people can use or important equipment details for certain types of players. So if you're a certain type of player, what sort of string should you use? Or can we kind of get somewhere today where we really try to knuckle into that to figure out some specifics just to help anyone that's listening? Because we got a decent tennis base, also just for my own journey and the families that are training with us, just to kind of understand how they can elevate their game, just with little tweaks with equipment and strings especially.
I think strings are tough. Like I think from memory, I think we did some numbers on it. I think there's over 1 billion combinations of string that you could put in a racket, right? Between tensions, hybrids. So how do you choose from that?
Yeah.
So like on our website at the moment, we've got a racket recommender and we're going to have a string one at some point. And we've just collected all the data from our Hawkeye tests. So I can run you through it, but it's basically like you would come in, you'd put your age into the recommender. You can do it online at home. These guys can have a go at it. It's just on the Tennis Lab website.
Yep.
So you go in, you put your age, your playing ability, what you're looking for in a racket, and then what our database actually does is it profiles you to every single person that's tested rackets on our Hawkeye court that are similar to you. So it'll find, say, every 28-year-old male advanced elite player looking for more power, more spin, and it might go, okay, we found 30 or 40 people. Of those 30 or 40 people, what were the best 10 rackets that worked for those people on our court with data? And it'll show you those. So it gives you a bit more of an educated guess in terms of what you might like, versus just walking into a shop and just feeling something.
Yeah.
And we're starting to build one out for string.
Okay.
So that might help people.
Yep.
But yeah, that's kind of what we use day to day in our stores. That racket recommender.
What does a Hawkeye test involve? So how does it work? Are you just playing balls up the middle and then playing points with serve return? And then how is it actually collecting data?
So it's a real closed session. So we use a ball machine, same speed, same spin, every test, balls landing in the same spot.
Yeah.
Players
so you can compare data with other people.
So there's no variance, right? So if I was to hit with you, right, and I said to you, okay, we're going to try to track some data on me. I need you to hit at 100 Ks an hour with this many RPMs in this spot every time and hit that spot. Like no one can hit like that.
Of course.
Like even a pro can't do that. It'd be very tough to do, right? So we use the ball machine to get rid of any differences. So when it's the same ball every time, the player will come out, try their racket, and then try maybe up to 10 rackets in that session, and we'll profile the 10 rackets that go in. So based on what they're looking for, we'll handpick 10 rackets of the 200 to 300 rackets that are on the market. They'll hit forehands cross, they'll hit backhands cross, they'll hit a weapon shot. So generally that'll be inside out forehand, and then they'll hit some serves. And then we'll analyze speed, spin control towards a certain target for each one of those rackets and compare them to their current. So for example, I've never seen this happen where the same racket kills it on every single shot. There'll be one racket that might be better for your backhand than your forehand because your grip might be a Western on your forehand and you might be Conti Eastern on your backhand. Or your serve's a little bit funky and something else might work. So then it's up to the player to work out, okay, what are my weapons? What are my weaknesses? What am I trying to gain?
Yeah, what's priority here?
Yeah, and then actually go from there. So like we've done that with a few players. Like we've done it with Tom Fancutt, who was on your podcast before.
Yeah.
And I can run you through his report. He's recently changed rackets. And he was really good about it. He was like, I wanted to find the best racket for me. I want to get to the best that I can get to. So let's have a crack at doing the test. And we found, like, for example, like on one of the rackets, he was getting like 8 or 9 Ks extra on first serve on average without doing anything in a 90-minute session, hitting 15 serves. So if he was to go and work with his coach to get an extra 8 to 9 Ks on his serve, how long would that take?
Yeah, 100%. Because I just spoke to him and he stayed with me when coming back from Namia. And he said he had the highest ace count for the tournament when he only played 3 matches in singles. And he was averaging 15 aces a match.
Yeah, beforehand, I don't think that's Tom's game style, right? He wouldn't have hit that.
He's always had a big serve, but just like that extra pop.
Yeah.
with the new racket that he's using.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah,
so
that's
we
very
can run
fascinating.
through his data. I've actually got it with me, so we can have a look at it.
Yeah, potentially we can get that on the screen with the edit deal.
Yeah, we can run through that, and I can show you guys like his results and how close they were to his current and stuff like that. But yeah, it's pretty interesting.
That's really, really interesting. Are there any other players that you've made a difference to?
Yeah, so
that you've kind of really worked with the data to actually figure out what's going to be good for them?
Yeah, so I've been really lucky through this role to work with a whole bunch of players. We've had like Andy Murray come in when he tried to do his racket switch, and he wanted his racket to feel a bit more similar to his old racket. That didn't work out, but he came in and he tried some stuff, and I think now he's changed his gut setup.
Yeah.
Just recently in the mains, as where he was in the cross, that was one of the combinations that we had in that testing. Whether he's looked at that data again to make that change, I don't know. But that on the day, like he was serving bombs with that as an example, and knowing how analytical he is, I'm sure he may have skimmed over it again. But we've had Rafa come in and do a testing session on the court, not with any equipment, but just for a practice session, wanting to know, what the balls are doing, like how heavy is he hitting and stuff like that. So players have used the court in that regard. But mainly a lot of the work we've done is with Aussies. So I've done a lot of work with Sam Stosur in the last few years of her playing. So I think we did a racket change. So she went from that Babolat Pure Storm to a head extreme. And then I think within a year from there, she went to a head speed. The reason for that was the extreme and the speed were one of her top two rackets in that test. And she said at the time, I think it was, I want the most spin, most power, which in a closed session, extreme was doing that. But then when she went onto the clay, got a little bit tight or, hitting a bit short, that ball's sitting up. So then the ball's getting put away, right? So she ended up going with the speed, and that's what she played with the rest of her career after that. And then from there, once the racket was picked, she was great. She's one of the easiest players I've ever worked with. She's pretty open to changing stuff. And obviously, towards the end, you want to keep her on court as long as possible. So then we did a string one. So it was like, all right, let's string up 9 rackets, different string combinations, gut mains, gut crosses, full poly with 3 different polys. And then we found that the setup that she had now with, I think she was using Hawk Touch at the time. It wasn't the best option. So then she switched to gut mains and Hawk 3. And then after that, we looked at like specs. So then we're like, can we make it lighter? Can we make the racket shorter? And that was towards when she was playing doubles. And, we chopped a couple of rackets shorter. She's like, yeah, these are great on volleys. Got more, maneuverability. I'm quick at the net, but it's not as fast on serve. So she was pretty open like that. So there's a lot of changes there. Dasher and Storm, similar things. We looked at racket length or racket spec, and we made some changes to them. So Dasher's racket's significantly lighter from before when we started with her. I think it's shorter now as well. She was using a 1/2 inch before, now she's not. And she's pretty easy to work with too. So we're doing things now with like ball changes. So I tried to educate a lot of the girls on, okay, new balls come out, what do you do? Or the balls are getting heavy, what do you do? So like now most of them have routines.
What do you do?
Yeah, so in that scenario, balls are new, and depends if you're serving and returning. This is just something I like to do with the players. So if they're serving, we're going the old racket from the previous game, because the strings are a little bit looser. They're not as fresh. They're going to be you're going to hit the ball a little bit faster. You're going to probably be able to hold serve a little bit easier. If you're returning, you're going to go the new racket for a bit more control. And then depending on where the balls come in, based on if they're serving or returning, they're grabbing those rackets. But even now, like through the summer, we've got the girls thinking about, okay, if the ball's starting to get heavy and it's cooler, you don't have to change new balls. You can change halfway through that ball change if you want to. So now they're starting to look at that kind of thing, or they're going up and grabbing the balls from the ball kids. What balls are you serving the first serve with? You want to find the newest ball in that pile because you want a faster point, right? Or second serve, you want to engage in a rally, right? So you're going to find the ball that's probably the fluffiest to slow things down a little bit. So it's starting to actually educate them to think about, okay, all this stuff, it matters. 1%ers might not make a difference, but it's just something extra.
It's a whole nother world, isn't it, Dill? Yeah, it's really interesting to think about and dive into this whole world, because it's something we're just not taught about. And I feel like it can give you a little bit more of an edge. I want to go through a few rackets. So the most popular rackets on tour.
Yeah.
If you can just reel out what they are and potentially why a certain player should think about using the E-Zone, for example, or like the Babala Aero, or the Blade, for example, just like common ones that are probably the most popular. Can we run through those and then how they can potentially be suited to a particular player and why they should think about using them?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a tough question, because I think each player should look at how they play and their technique, right? I'm really big on, okay, if you've got a semi-Western, you could probably use a 98 head size or 100 kind of thing. But if you're a Western grip, you're going to probably need the width in the frame, right? Mm-hmm. You're coming at the ball at a different angle, so probably more 100 head size might suit. As where you might find, like in the older days where players like, not too long ago, but like Del Potro, it was like more Eastern on the forehand, Conti Eastern on the backhand. You could get away with using a 95 head size. Imagine putting that racket in Rafa's hand and him trying to hit a forehand.
Horrible.
It's not going to work, right? So I think players should look at what their style is and try to fit it to that, and what their weapons are and what they're trying to enhance. So, for me, I've got a 1E backhand, always struggled with it. I've got a hybrid forehand grip, which is Eastern palm, semi-Western knuckle on the forehand, so it's a little bit funky. And I got a big serve. So for me, I'm going something that's 98, 18-20 or a 16-19. So I actually play with the Blade, and then it feels good on the serve, feels good on the forehand, and then the backhand, it's good for the 1E because it's a bit more traditional swing line, right? As where if I was a Western grip on the forehand, it's not going to be as good. As where on the backhand, if I have 100 head size, you don't really see many 1Es with 100, right?
That's an interesting point.
It's a little bit, it's something I've noticed. I think Schiavone had 100, she had an Aero. Groth had 100 Aero. Can't think of too many others. Oh, Lopez, the Ultra or the Juice that he was using, 100 head size. But most of them tend to have smaller head sizes. It's such a linear swing, right? So it's just trying to fit what you're using to how you play.
Yeah. So I just want to dive into a little bit more the specifics. So when it comes to equipment, I want to know more about dampeners. So how do they work? Do they actually do anything in particular? Like I've just always been told that they're good for vibration and just reducing the shock and potentially like reducing injuries. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so dampeners are an interesting one, right? So first thing, as a player with kids coming through your club or whatever it is, you want to be consistent with them, right? So something that you'll see is kids will like one type of dampener, it's got a smiley face on it or something. Then they might have a different dampener on their other racket where it might be, branded with the name of their coaching business that they get coached at, right? So dampeners may be made of different materials. There might be different weights. So you might have that one coaching business one that might weigh like 6 or 7 grams. And then you might have that little smiley face one that's 3 grams. So straight away, by putting them into your racket, you're changing the specs of the frame. So you've got extra weight sitting in there. But something that everything that people say around dampeners is usually like, oh, it helps injuries, or it might help my arm because I've got tennis elbow. From some of the research we've done, all a dampener does is actually just mask mishits. So it'll change the sound. So something you'll notice when you don't have a dampener in, that's quite common when you ask people why they use one. They go, I put it in because I got sick of that tinging sound happening when I hit the ball. So you hit the ball and you hear that ting, and it's because they're not hitting it in the center. So if you take that same racket and you gave it to someone who could hit the ball quite hard and clean and hit it in the middle, that sound would go away. So all it's doing is changing the sound that the player's hearing. So some people go, well, why do pros use them? Some players prefer the sound that makes, but while it's in there or while it's not, or that kind of thing as well. Yeah.
Also just habit, and they've always just used one. It just is comfortable to them. But that's really interesting. I didn't realize it was just purely sound based.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Like, you can try it yourself. So anyone out there, take the dampener out, hit for a while with it, it'll feel a little bit weird and sound weird to you. And then as soon as you pop it back in, the sound will change.
That's really interesting. I like not using a dampener for the feedback it gives you though, because it almost like forces me to try to hit clean. Yeah. And then when I don't, I get that feedback of like, I'm not hitting clean, and it's like, it makes me almost like strive to hit cleaner.
Yeah, you sort of start to realise if you're hitting it in the middle or not, because you start hearing that ting, 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 and it's actually quite annoying, right?
Yeah.
So then that's why people tend to put them in.
Yeah. What about shape strings? And do they give you more spin?
Yeah, shape strings are interesting. So everybody's always told, like, you know, there's some strings that are shaped like a 50-cent coin, as an example, right?
Yeah.
Where they've got edges on them.
Yeah, like the hexagonal. Yes,
whatever.
yes.
And they actually don't give you more spin. You actually have to hit the ball harder.
Can you break that down?
Oh, that's me.
I can just ask that question again.
Yeah, go again.
Can you just break down shape strings? So do they give you more spin? And also just talk about what that actually is. So I know there's different shapes like hexagonal type strings, and they have edges and some of them are more round.
Yeah.
Can you explain that for the person that might not know what that is? And then is there a different, and does that actually create more spin or not?
Yeah, so people generally go, oh, I hit the ball a bit flat. What should I do to get some more spin? And people will be like, oh, go grab a shape string, right? So something that's a bit hexagonal, like you were mentioning, with some edges. But it's a bit of a myth, right? Those types of strings, they create more friction. So everything that we've seen in our research, you want snapback of the string bed. So you want the strings to actually move against themselves. So if you've got your mains and your crosses, you want them to kind of move like this when the ball's impacting to create spin. So by putting a shaped string in like that with edges, they're actually notching into each other, and it's creating more friction and harder for them to move. So ideally you want the smoothest, roundest string possible to get extra spin, unless you're someone like a professional player who can hit the ball so hard that you can actually force those strings to deform, then it's a different story. But strings that are like alu rough, as an example, where they're not actually shaped, they're almost pressed in. So if you feel them, there's almost like it's almost like a stamp press. It's like rough coated.
Yes.
That's a little bit different. So they'll actually produce more spin because they're still round. The actual true nature of that string is a round string, and they've kind of been pressed in with that shape, versus something that's hexagonal. It's actually got sharp edges onto it.
That'd be really hard to manufacture.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, because the strings are tiny, and to create all those edges on them.
Yeah, string's quite interesting. I don't know if you've seen it made. I've seen a couple of videos where it's basically plastic. They get heated, they get put through this massive machine, and they get stretched. So as they get stretched, they start to get to the string gauges, and that's where they cut them out. So the more you stretch a string, obviously the thinner it gets, the less you stretch it, the thicker it is.
What about gut? Because that's intestine, right?
Yeah, same thing.
So how is that manufactured? Is that a different process because it's a natural product? Or?
Yeah, that one, I haven't really seen many videos of it. I've seen a couple of pictures of like what a factory would look like, but basically because it's a natural product, there's a lot of moisture in it, right? So it's actually got to dry out. So they've got it hanging these kind of warehouse type things. Yeah. They dry out, they stretch them, then they cut them. That's why you end up with different, and it's obviously a lot harder to get the gauges. So if you look at a company like Babolat with their guts, they normally have like VS Touch or VS Team or Tonic and those other types of gut, which might be cheaper or more expensive. And if you look at a Tonic gut, on the packet, it actually doesn't give you the exact gauge. So it'll have like an arrow, and it'll say no greater than 135 or no less than 125, because they can't.
It'd be so hard to actually pinpoint what that actually is.
So the way it's been explained to me, whether it's right or wrong, it's almost like they've stretched it out. That middle section, they can get almost very right, cut it up into the right and gauges, and then the kind of the ends where they're pulling and doing stuff, it's obviously harder to get accurate.
That's fascinating.
Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not 100% sure, but that's how it's kind of been explained to me in the past.
What about pro stock rackets versus just off the shelf?
Yeah, so pro stocks, everybody always goes, pro stock rackets are better. Like, I have to get a pro stock, and you see them online, right? People sell rackets for $500 to $1,000 going, it's a pro stock, it's better.
As in the one, a racket that comes from the factory, straight from the factory.
Yeah, so you've got like the rackets that come from the brands directly for players.
Yes.
So that would be more of a pro stock. And then you've got like the off-the-shelf ones. Pro stocks are basically one or two things. They're either an old off-the-shelf racket that player is continually using, that's now been painted as something that looks like whatever they wanted to market as, right? So, I don't know, let's just say you had a player using a speed from like 5 years ago, and then they've painted it as a speed that looks like the the speed that's on the shelf now. They're still the same shape, still a similar family, same frame.
Just got a paint job.
It's just got a paint job. That player prefers that feel. So that's where pro stocks come in. It's like it's most of the time it's a racket that you could buy at one point in time, or they have the ability to change the specifications of them. So sometimes you might not have the ability with an off-the-shelf racket to change the length.
Yeah. So do some of these brands in the factories, are they still making the same rackets from 5 years ago in a small quantity to cater to some of these people that still want that? Or how does it work? Do they manipulate the rackets that they're making now to almost make as the old one? How is that process?
If you look at, like, we were chatting about the E-zone, right? You look at all the E-zones. They're still similar shapes, similar throat shapes. The head sizes are the same. String pattern's still the same. They might change things like the layup of the frame, so how the carbon flexes on impact, the string pattern spacing. So it might be wider or smaller. It's still 16, 19, but they might do things to make the racket more controllable or more powerful, and then they would just paint those. So like we were chatting about your racket, if you're a professional player, and I'm assuming, let's just say you're a top 100 player, and you tried the new frame, you might go, okay, yeah, I didn't like it as much, it's too powerful for me. They may make you the old one. It just depends on the player and their preference, where they're ranked, what the brand can and can't do. Obviously, like stringing, you see a lot of rackets, so you do see different frames come in. But yeah, like you'll see, like a lot of the brands, they'll advertise, say these frames are endorsed by. So you don't know what the player's actually using. It might be the same frame, but they might have different specs. You know, they might be a little bit longer or a little bit heavier or whatever that is. Yeah,
because that Rafa, that famous Babolat, that had the flat throat.
Yep.
That arrow.
Yeah, the one from like 05.
Yeah, so there was, I don't know how true this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he was using it for a very extended period after.
Yep.
Like for another 10 years or something, right?
I think he's still using the same frame. I haven't come across his racket in a stringer room. I haven't gone near it, so can't 100% confirm. But yeah, a lot of players like that, if they get so accustomed to something, they'll just continuously make it for them. And obviously someone like Rafa, like you're going to do whatever you can for him to keep him using your brand, right? The amount of rackets he would sell or players he would influence to use the racket that he's using, it's got a lot of value to it. So obviously you're going to do whatever he needs. And it's not like it's a completely different racket. It's not like they've got a pure strike, they've painted it as an aero and saying Rafa's using an aero. It was an aero at one point in time. It's just an older version of it.
Yeah, 100%. It's so interesting to hear about and look at these guys like Rafa with Babolat and then Federer with Wilson and then Djokovic with Head, just literally spearheading these brands forward. Without them, like, the brand can't really live.
It's quite interesting when you see how kids pick rackets. And I see it every day when they come into the store. It's like, okay, I like Djokovic or I like Rafa, and they'll go straight for that racket. But that racket might not suit them. So that's where we're trying to change the industry, where we're trying to make it more, I guess, like golf. If you're starting to play golf, you're going to go get custom clubs fitted. You're going to find the right equipment. In tennis, we don't do that. It's like, okay, I like Roger. I'm going to go get the pro stuff. But you might have a two-handed backhand, a Western grip, and you're a beginner. What are you using a 340-gram racket for? It's not going to work, right?
Yeah, it's like Harry Potter with the wand.
Yeah.
Like the wand chooses you. Just like making tennis more like it's a wand and you need to do all the right testing to get the right wand for you.
Yeah, so that's where like I really like what we do, and I'm a big advocate for what we do with the blackout testing because it gets rid of all the bias. So, you know, I've had some advanced players come in that are recreational going, I play best with a heavy racket. I have to have a racket that's 350 grams and over, and that's all I can play with. And then we'll do the testing, and I'll be a bit cheeky and chuck in some rackets that are like 280 gram. And then that outperforms everything. And they go, nah, your data's wrong. I'm like, mate, you hit with the racket. You hit better with the racket. The data doesn't lie. That's what it says.
Data don't lie.
But yeah, that's where I like what we do because then it helps that part of it, but it also helps other brands. So, you know, obviously Wilson, Babolat, Head, they're the biggest brands out there. So people are more likely to pick those rackets. And sure, there might be a racket within those rackets that fit you, But then we've got like Technifibers, Dunlops, Volcool. There's a whole range of other rackets out there that people won't necessarily go and pick up.
But it's not cool. It's not cool. But
it's also not cool to lose all the time,
100%,
right?
Yeah, you got to change the mindset to get more performance orientated, to go, what's actually going to get me the best results, rather than what's going to make me look good.
Yeah,
or what is cool, and what are people using.
And don't get me wrong, some players will go, no, I'm not using that. I'm just going to go with the second or third best one because it's one of those brands.
Sure.
But I feel like if you're investing in yourself and you're doing the testing, you're going to pick what's performing best for you.
100%. Yeah, that's where the power of marketing is huge here. What about 18 by 20 versus 16 by 19 string patterns? So they're the most two common string patterns. What are the differences? What should people be really thinking about with those two different string patterns?
So I'm going to flip the question back on you. So what's a 16? If you were picking a racket, you had the same racket in a 16-19 and the other racket in 18-20. Explain to me why you'd pick one over the other.
So 16-19, from my understanding, is a little bit more open string pattern, a little bit better for spin. Maybe a little bit more power, slightly less control, versus 18-20, slightly smaller, and you're basically going to get a little bit more control, a little bit more stiffness maybe.
Yeah, so an 18-20 string bed should definitely come out a little bit tighter if you're stringing that at, say, 48 versus 16-19.
Strings last longer in the 18-20, from my experience. Could be completely...
The gaps in the string bed are a little bit smaller, right? So there's probably, I guess, the impact is probably spread out amongst more strings. But then you said something interesting in there. You said 16-19 is going to give you more spin. That's something we're always told, right?
Yeah.
That might be the case for recreational players, but when we've done some testing with some professional players, when they hit with an 18-20, they're actually generating more spin because they can put more there's more string bed friction. So they can, like we spoke about before, where they can force the strings to snap back. In an 18-20, there's more strings that can actually move and then snap back and put more spin on the ball.
Interesting.
That's why we're always told, it's all about control. You're not going to get more spin in it. You're going to get more spin in a 16-19. So it actually depends on your game style and how hard you can hit the ball.
So what would you recommend though for a certain player style that should potentially be looking at a 16-19 versus 18-20? I
think it like we spoke about earlier, like it depends on the player's grips and how they hit the ball. Someone like me, I hit quite flat. I'm probably more suited to an 18-20. Just for that control, so it's not as, like, I guess I'm not getting that trampoline effect as much. Maybe if I can hit it a little bit harder, I might be able to get a little bit more shape on it, as where the 16-19 for someone like me is a bit more erratic. If I hit it slightly off center, or the strings are starting to get loose and they're moving and not snapping back, they're going to fly. But you wouldn't give someone with a full Western grip an 18-20, right? Again, it depends on the racket. It could be an 18-20 speed, right? That's different. It's got 100 head size versus something that's got a 95 head size. But yeah, it's all subjective to the player.
Interesting. So stringing rackets on different machines, does that matter? Because you obviously go into different tournaments and you're experiencing different machines. Does it change the quality of the restring? Does it change kind of the performance of the racket? What are some things to think about there? With
the machines, every machine will string slightly different, right? So if I've strung a lot on the Onyx machine, I've strung a lot on the Wilson machine. So they're the two machines that are basically used at 3 of the 4 slams. Those machines... Is
there another machine that's used at a different slam?
Yeah, so I think Wimby uses Babolat. I haven't actually strung on one of those machines. We don't really have many of them in Australia. The Wilson one's quite accessible, and then we've obviously got some Yonex ones that are used at the Oz Open. Stringing on those machines, there's subtle differences between them. So, like, for example, the tension heads might move faster on one machine than the other. So the string might stretch a little bit more, so it might come out a bit tighter. The way the racket's clamped into the mounting system is different. All that sort of stuff changes. So I've got a funny story with this. So done a bit of work with Stoza, and she, for some reason, didn't like when she would put rackets in if anyone ever used a Yonex machine. Didn't know why. She just said it just felt weird. It felt maybe a little bit too tight, and just didn't really like how her rackets would come out on that machine. Just her preference. So she'd always get somebody to string it on something else. So generally it would end up being one of those Wilson machines. So we were stringing a little bit for her over the pre-season and stuff, and I thought, no, I'm not going to be jumping across different machines. I'm just going to try to figure out whether she can actually feel what she's saying. So I ended up stringing one racket on the Yonex machine and one racket on the Wilson machine, and I didn't tell her. She's gone out and hit and come back in and gone, this second racket feels different. And it was the one that I strung on the Yonex one. I'm like, you're kidding me. So players can feel it. So it might be that the fact that it might feel a little bit stiffer off the machine straight away versus a different machine, or how the stringer is stringing it and that kind of stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's the case in a tournament setting, we're trying to make sure that the players' rackets aren't jumping machines. So say you're my player, I'm stringing on the Yonex machine, you're going to stay with me the whole tournament till you're out. And then if I disappear from the tournament because it's my turn to stagger out of the team, anyone who's going to take over your racket will use that machine to string your racket.
Yeah.
So you try to keep things consistent.
Yeah, 100%. That's what we're talking about, just making sure that everything stays consistent over the whole period. So you just remove any of the inconsistencies.
Yeah, exactly.
So Thanasi, he had the blacked out rackets when he was here the previous, not last year, I think the year before, when he made the semi-final and then won the tournament here in Adelaide. There was 2 tournaments back to back. So were you stringing his rackets that week? What was happening, and what racket was he actually using with that blacked out?
Yeah,
what racket actually was it?
Yeah, so I wasn't stringing for him. I wasn't here. But in that off season, we were doing a lot of racket testing with him, using our Hawkeye court. He spent a lot of time with us. So I think he was using an Aero prior. So we tested like maybe 10 to 15 different rackets, different brands, different string patterns, different lengths, different weights, just trying to find something to help him. I think his biggest one was, it was mainly around injury prevention, and then something where, okay, we can help keep his body healthy, but he's not going to lose power, spin, all that kind of stuff. So through all that testing, he ended up with the Yonex E-Zone. And obviously...
Which model?
It was the 2020. So the all blue one, I think it's the one that you use.
Yeah.
So that's the model that at the time was out. That was the off-the-shelf one. So basically we just used the off-the-shelf one. His one's extended. Performed the best. Then we had a couple of weeks where he's playing matches, practice sets with people, and just like switching out that racket with his racket and different rackets and all that kind of stuff. And then I think it was like maybe a week and a half before the tournament, he was like, all right, let's go. I'm going to commit to this racket. So then he's obviously done what he needed to do to get those rackets to us. We've then customized them, and then he's come here and I guess played some of the best tennis of his life. Mm-hmm. I can't say that the racket's completely done that for him.
Of course.
But from some of the stats we've seen, his unforced errors reduced, certain things changed over a longer course of time across a lot of matches versus his older racket. So obviously that contributes to something. But yeah.
Definitely a factor, for sure. So he had the racket blacked out. Why?
I'm assuming with players like that, there's obviously things with contracts. So I'm not involved in any of that stuff. We just help with the racket. But some players may black out rackets because it's a feel thing. They might prefer the feel of a black racket. Some players say it feels different than when it's painted.
You're joking, right?
No, I'm not. What colour's Grigor's racket at the moment?
It's the black.
It's black.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pro stuff. Yeah. So for him, it might feel different. I'm not 100% sure. I know Corder plays with a black racket. I think now he's using a green racket, but he's played most of last year with a black racket. It could be for the look and feel of a black racket.
It does look pretty boss though. Like just that blacked out racket.
I think people just like the look of a black glossy racket.
Yeah,
it's just clean.
It is slick.
Yeah, there's no colour in your eyes when you're swinging the racket. It's just easy to use and that kind of stuff. But yeah, like that's probably part of it. Then the other part is contract stuff. So whether the players got a sponsorship with them or not. So some players will go, well, I'm getting these rackets. Like there's players on tour maybe buying rackets as an example. They're going, I'm not going to give that advertising away where people can see that I'm using, say, I don't know, an Aero or
without an actual contract.
Yeah. So they'll take them somewhere and get them blacked out, or you look at the year
and wait for someone to come to them.
Yeah, or they might approach them going, hey, I'm actually using your racket. I really like your racket. I've just got them blacked out at the moment. can we do something? You know, stuff like that happens. But you look at the year that Baghdadis melted all those sticks, they're all like custom painted blue with his name on them. They weren't actually branded. So he just did something different. They weren't blacked out. He just painted them blue.
Yeah, okay. Because what was he actually using?
Not 100% sure.
That video is iconic, by the way.
Yeah, I think he was tossing between, I think he was using Technifiber at one stage, and he was with Fisher, and I think, what was it, Fisher, maybe Pacific, one of those three brands.
Yeah.
So it might have been one of those rackets.
Do you remember that video?
Yeah. I think everybody remembers that video, especially when he's melting the ones that are still in the plastic.
Was it 6 or 5?
I have no idea, but it was a few.
Yeah, I think it was at least 5.
Like whoever painted those rackets would have been going cha-ching.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever done that many at one time.
Yeah,
as a professional.
But yeah, so that's why players will use different coloured rackets, or they just don't want people to either know what they're using, or they don't have a deal, or they're waiting for something from the brand or whatever it is.
Yeah, interesting what goes into all of it.
Yeah, or some players they might not want to sign with someone straight away and get used to a racket, so they don't want to commit to anything. So they'll have a couple of black rackets, or like when Roger was changing his racket, it was blacked out. Who knows what he was doing? Maybe he had different versions of that racket in his bag. Maybe he had different lengths, different whatever it is. If it's black all the time, people don't see anything different. So they might be hiding something. Like you don't know what they're testing.
Whole nother world.
Yeah.
What was the change that Federer made? So I feel like he was struggling. He was using the 95 for quite a while, and then he transitioned.
He was 90 square inches. So I used to call his racket the modern day wooden racket. Right? It's a really thin beam. I think from memory, it's like a 19 mil beam. There's one of a video on our Tennis Lab Instagram page where we looked at the Hawkeye data from the year previous to when he switched to the black racket. 90 square inch, 16-19, 19 mil beam, super thin, super flexy. And then he switched to a 97 Pro Staff, a little bit thicker.
That's a big change.
Massive change.
And that transformed his game, because he started doing a lot better from that point, right?
Yeah, your timing doesn't have to be as on. It's a little bit easier to hit the ball, like especially on the backhand. Like you look at where, and this is something I just noticed, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but whenever Rafa would play me, try to pin him in the backhand, hit high loopy balls into that backhand, and with a 90 square inch, it's really hard to hit the ball. And I think because Federer was so good with his hands, he could get away with that racket, but you could see over time it became harder and harder for him to play with that. And obviously when he made the racket change, he was actually a lot more competitive again. That's where that stuff kind of comes in. I think for players like that, if they're willing to make a change at that level, a lot of other people should have a look at it, because I feel like tennis players or people in general, when they use something, they're quite stubborn and they kind of rely on feel. And some of the racket brands that I've worked with, where I asked them, how do you, when you're changing rackets with the player, what do you do? And one of the guys from one of the brands said to me, the question they always ask the players is, if I can make you any racket, but it didn't feel nice, but you're winning more, would you change? And he was saying, majority of the rackets, most of the players would say no. And there was like 1 or 2 players, which I would say are in that GOAT category, that were like, doesn't matter what it feels like, I want to be winning. I need the best performance I can. So they just made a switch.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because you hear a lot of players always talk about the feeling.
Yeah.
I'm just not feeling it. Oh, this is not... I think you got to really disregard that at times and look at the whole picture of how is it actually performing. I think the players, if you're open to that and actually making some of these tweaks, you can actually get some really good performance changes like Federer did, for example. Yeah,
I think it's tough, because even I'm a little bit fussy with the ball and the racket and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, if it's performing better, I can hit the ball deeper and stuff. Okay, I'll give it a go. It might not feel nice, but people got to remember, you've been using a racket for a long time, right? Like you with your E-zones that you were mentioning, right?
Yeah.
You've been holding this racket for a long time. You're so used to the feel that I almost describe it as this numb feeling. So you lose the feel of your racket over time, right? You don't know what it feels like anymore. Versus when you put like a new racket in your hand, straight away you kind of feel like, oh, it's more powerful, or it's less powerful, or you're getting more spin or not. You just notice it straight away. Whereas where your own racket becomes this like baseline, normal, numb kind of feel. And I think that's where some people either they change rackets a lot because they like feeling the racket and like feeling, okay, it's doing this or it's doing that. while other players don't because they don't like being able to feel the change. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. It's such an interesting point, and I can fully understand that because I've been trying a whole bunch of rackets to really get a feel. Is there something I can change? And I tried so many, and then at the end of the day, I just went back to my E zone and just went down a model. And I was like, it's just nothing is grabbing me to really make me want to change. But if I had something like the setup that you guys had where I did all the proper testing and got the actual analytics, I think I'd be more open to changing because I actually would find the right racket that was giving me the information that I needed to see that could actually help me make the tangible change and disregard the feeling a little bit more.
Yeah, because you would know on paper, okay, I've done the testing, this racket's doing this, it's better on my forehands, better on my backhands, better on my serve. Okay, it doesn't feel as nice now, but over time, you're going to get used to it.
100% you're going to get used to it.
Yeah.
Because you just remember when you were a kid, you just use anything.
Yeah. It's
and
just
you don't really care. And then you get a feel for it and then it just becomes like, oh, it's my racket. Like,
yeah, it's that initial change that people don't like. It's just that picking up something and it feels different. It might be the handle, might be the way the racket flexes, might be that, the most string patterns are 16, 19, right? But not all of those 16, 19s are the same. The drill patterns are different. They might be wider or smaller. You look at it like I think now on the 2 Aeros that are out, I think the 300 gram model's got a much denser 16, 19 versus the Aero T. It's a lot wider. So those 2 string beds, if they're weighted up the same, those rackets, they're going to perform different. The one that's more wider, you're going to break more strings, you're going to get more string movement, you're probably going to get more spin, more power. Versus the other one, you're going to get more control.
Yeah. We need more guys like you in the corner just telling us what to do. I got no idea. Where's the balance though? Like you can get so obsessed with the equipment.
Then you're in trouble.
Where's the balance between just like thinking about the equipment, but then also disregarding and maybe having a look at your own game and how you're actually striking the ball, maybe some technical tweaks or movement tweaks, for example. What advice would you give on that? Because you can get obsessed either way. You can be too rigid one way or too rigid the other way. Do you have any kind of advice or how to manage that balance between the two?
I think it's tough. I think it's up to the player and their team, right? And they need someone in their corner to say, well, no, that's not a racket thing. It might be a grip thing or a movement thing or whatever it is. I mean, I've seen so many players do some weird stuff. Like one that comes to mind that I love when this guy comes into the tennis. Like when I first started, I was like, oh, it's AO. This guy's going to come in. Albert Ramos, right? Yeah. He's got this reputation on tour for being crazy with his rackets, right? He's the nicest guy, super funny, but he's obsessed with his racket balance. And that's a byproduct of your weight and mass of your racket. You can get them pretty close. So I think at the time, I might be wrong here, but I think he wanted like 31.1 or 31.2 balance. And it had to be that. And so when we're customizing rackets, like if I was customizing a racket for Federer, I reckon I would let it go out with a 0.1 of a difference. So if it needs to be 31.1 and I can't get it exactly on that, it's 31.2, it's not that much of a difference that they're going to even feel that. So he was obsessed with that. And Lyndon, my manager last year, he just did something so funny. Albert was in the room with us. He was like weighing all these rackets. He comes in, gets everything perfect for that AO every time. And he was weighing all the rackets. He's like, they got to be exactly the same weight to the 0.1 of the gram. And he's putting his grips on. And Lyndon was like, the grips might be like different in weight. And he's like, what do you mean? And he's like, they might be like a little bit heavier, a little bit lower. Like the only time the rackets are ever the same is when they're on the machine. Like you use them, you scratch them up, or you chip the bumper, or they're going to change, right? So he gets a scale out, starts weighing his grips and cutting them to the same weight. And I was like, why did you tell him that?
This guy doesn't need any more grips.
Yeah, that was pretty funny when he did that. It was so funny. But yeah, so he was weighing his grips and then just cutting them to the right length so they were the same. But then at least he can go on court relaxed going, okay, they're all exactly the same. They're going to be perfect. He doesn't need to think about, okay, this one's not strung right. This one's a little bit off.
He can get that out of his mind.
Yeah, so it's almost like works in reverse. He's like a little bit crazy with it, but it's enough crazy that when he goes on court and it's done perfect, he's not thinking about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I see the logic in that.
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
Are there weird requests, any kind of people that stand out, just interesting kind of combinations that people have with their equipment, or any stories that kind of stand out with people that you've worked with on the tour?
I think there's one you guys would be able to find the footage for this one. I think this one went nuts on Tennis Nerd or something at one stage. So one of the Aussie players we work with, Andrew Harris, really good player. So I think he was about 150 in the world at the time. He was having a lot of arm problems. So we needed to make his racket a bit lighter. He was using the strikes at the time. And I can't remember if at the time they had a 98 model that was like a L or they only did 100. Don't quote me on that one. But I remember him saying something like, the lighter rackets feel different, so I'd prefer the heavier one, but we had to make it lighter. So we end up having to cut his bumpers all the time. So he played Berrettini on I think it was called Strong Cane Arena now, but I can't remember what it was called at the time. And he's playing Berrettini with a racket where it's got like this much bumper on the left and right and no bumper in the center. And we used to call it the Homer Simpson racket. And then all these people were like, what's this guy doing? He's playing with a racket with like no bumper on it. But it was just to reduce swing weight because it's really hard to reduce weight in a racket. So yeah, if you can look that on up, you'll see the racket with like no bumper at the top. He's on like that court playing Berrettini. I think he got a set off him from memory.
That would have looked weird.
Yeah, it would have looked weird.
Because I've never seen that before.
Yeah, so we just literally got a Stanley knife, cut the bumper part that protects the actual racket and left the center part of the grommet strip just to reduce the weight to get it to the spec. And then we had to put a little bit of lead tape on the frame on the outside to get it to spec.
That's crazy.
And why did he want that off?
Yeah, so it was just to reduce the weight so it could swing quicker. So the actual specs that he was playing with were lighter than what the racket could be off the shelf. So it's impossible to get the specs that he wanted. So you almost have to reduce weight from somewhere. And those bumpers generally weigh between like 12 and 16 grams.
Okay.
So there's a lot of weight there that you can chop off and reduce that. And usually 1 gram at the top of a racket is about 3.5 swing weight points. And 3.5's quite a bit. So you move 2, that's 7 points. It's quite a significant change.
Yeah, that's crazy. The lengths people go to. I just recently found out about Manarino's setup, which has got to be the most craziest. Yeah, I
strung for him at United Cup last year.
Is it the same sort of setup?
Yeah, he was using an old Aero and it was I had to string for him, I think it was 9.5 kilos, which is like 20 pounds or something, whatever it is.
So a tension of 20.
Yeah, and it was one of the...
So common for people who don't understand that would be common tension is about 50.
So put it this way, between his racket... Actually, hang on, who did I string for? So I strung for Novak this year as well at United Cup. His racket was like 64, 65.
Okay.
And then like Storm was in the 44, 46 area, right? So Manarino's restring fits in between the two of them as a whole nother tension. That's the big difference between those two. He's a whole nother restring. It's not that much. Like 20 pounds is nothing. It's like between a player, like, okay, it's 20 pounds. To string a racket, that's nuts.
Yeah, that's nuts. So it's super, super loose, right?
Yeah, it's crazy loose.
Which makes sense for his game, but almost impossible for anyone to use.
I haven't tried it, but I don't know how he plays with it. Like when I was stringing it, because I'd never strung a racket that loose, I actually said to him, I don't know if I've stuffed this up, but you're going to have to tell me if it feels tight or loose or whatever it is. But when you're weaving the crosses, the mains are going away from you with it. They're not sitting still. So it was actually...
It's like a trampoline.
Yeah, so it was actually easier for me to string a racket at, say, like 55 to 60 pounds versus stringing his at 9.5 kilos because the mains are moving every time I'm weaving the crosses. But it was quite funny. So he took that racket, hit with it, came back in and was like, look, it was okay, but it was a little bit loose for the conditions here in Perth. It was warm. I'm like, well, all right, what do you want to do? He's like, 10 kilos. Okay. All right, mate, we'll do 10. Does 10. Next day comes in and goes a little bit tight. And I'm looking at him going, mate, I just did 9.5. We did 10. And our machines go up in 0.1 of a kilo. So I'm like, do you want to do 9.7? It's like in between. He's like, yeah. So we did that and he went with that the rest of the week. 0.1 is crazy to be stringing in 0.1. But yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah.
It was pretty funny.
Yeah, these requests. Any kind of funny stories or people that stand out, like you spoke about Novak, or I want to know a little bit more about the reputation behind closed doors with some of these players. Is there anyone that stands out for you? No,
they're all pretty good. Like they'll all come in, I'll say good morning. I think most of them know that stringers, like it's a tough gig, right? People don't realize, and I think players getting on tour they almost like, obviously with tennis, right? You almost become a bit selfish because you're playing an individual sport. You're on your own all the time. You're thinking about yourself. So when it kind of sometimes comes across that way when they're putting rackets in, right? Because they don't realize they're not the only player there. So they'll come in and go, all right, it's 9 o'clock. Can I get a racket right now? I'm on at 10. It's like, mate, I got 30 other rackets here for other players. Like, you're not the only one in the draw. So it's like some of these guys, they kind of get that. They know the hours we're doing because generally we have to be there an hour before play and sometimes 1 to 2 hours after play. So that's a big day, right? So if play's starting at 10, you're there at 9 if you haven't got any rackets to do. Generally there's rackets and strings, so you're probably there at 7:30. Last match might go on at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and then you're there till at least 10, and then it's whatever rackets are there to do. So then you're stringing longer. So you might do a midnight finish, or like here this week, there's a couple times where I finished at 2 in the morning, started at 7. Like it's pretty tough. Like people don't realise.
Of course, yeah.
And like we got 4 guys stringing, so you're getting that many rackets. You're stringing 35 to 40 rackets a day. And then you have to be precise. And then if you get someone who's stringing really high or they're really finicky with their racket, you have to be careful. So you're not stringing a racket in 15, 20 minutes. All of a sudden you're stringing 30 minutes. So like when I'm stringing Novak's rackets, I'm making sure they're perfect. Because I haven't strung for him before. Haven't had much to do with him. So I'm like being really careful. Don't know what his feels like. Because with some of the Aussies, I know they can't feel much. So I don't have to be as careful. So I can string, I'm still doing a really good job and doing it at a high quality, but I can string it in 20 minutes. I'm not like making sure the clamp's super tight and putting it really close to the frame and straightening it perfectly while it's in the tension head and dropping no tension and making sure it's like so tight that it's like the most perfect restring in the world.
Yeah. I'm just imagining stringing Novak's racket, my just like hands trembling like for the goat. Like I don't want to stuff it up. Like
it's funny because I used to be nervous when I'd string for some players. Like I remember like when we did that stuff with Murray and his racket came in, or like when the first time I strung for Ash, like I was so nervous. I was like crapping myself. Like, I was like, oh my God, this is going to have to be perfect. Like, but then after a while you just go like, they're fine. Like it's, like, I think people make such a big deal of it. Like you just have to do a really good job, and they're going to be fine. And that's what I did this year. Like you just get used to it. You're just like, okay. And then if there's an issue or they think it's too loose or too tight, they'll tell you. Mm-hmm. They'll go, look, that one's a little bit looser. Then you go, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to go up in tension? Do you want to stay the same? They'll go, stay the same. Try it again. Maybe string it in the morning. Or string it late at night, because that makes a difference too.
Oh my God.
So you get morning requests and night requests. That's why we're there for so long, right? So you get players come in and go, okay, can you string this last racket on your machine tonight? Yep, no worries.
Wow.
Or string it in the AM. So then, okay, you go like, for example, one of the days, I was lucky with one of the players I had here in Adelaide lost, but I would have had 12 or 13 rackets to string for 9:30 or 10 AM. So I'd have to get there pretty early. That's like half a day's work for just stringing the morning rackets. So the players are doing that kind of stuff. And then if it's gut, you know, some of them want them strung close to the match because it drops tension, or they don't want it in a room where it's humid. So you might have seen that video in Brisbane that went viral with Grigor.
No, what was it?
You can see it. He broke 4 strings in one match.
Yes, yeah. What happened there?
Yeah, so people like commentators, everyone's like, oh, what are the strings doing, or what's happening with these rackets or whatever. People don't know that Grigor's using 1.25 gut with 4G in the crosses. I think he's around 23 kilos or in that range, or 24 kilos with gut in a very humid place. Brisbane was raining so much. It's like 35, 40 degrees, so humidity's so high. Natural gut is made out of cow intestines. Right? It's a natural product, so it starts to decay when it's in air. That's why it's always in a sealed bag. You can't get it in reels. So, and he stringed the night before. So the guys there are stringing his rackets. They got to string them the night before. So they're sitting in humid conditions. Then he's playing on court with an 18-18 string pattern, which is pretty open. So of course the string's going to break. So that's stuff that people don't realise. And they go, what's going on? Like, why is he breaking strings? But people don't realise, like, natural gut, it's a natural product. You can't get it wet. It shouldn't be humid. It's got to be looked after. Like, when we use a set of gut, if there's a half set, we got to put it in a Ziploc bag so it doesn't start to get wrecked.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what did you guys do from there? Was that your team?
Our team was there.
What were the changes you made after that?
Yeah, so when that started happening, the guys there were really good. They were really proactive. So we started getting tennis bags that have like that like that esky kind of
Yes, that
finish, that metal kind of finish in the bag,
100%.
where it's like climate controlled. So they was putting rackets in there so the humidity wouldn't get to it, or putting the bag in an air conditioned room, things like that. And then that might solve a little bit of the problem, but it wasn't going to do too much because he's always playing it in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
The rackets are strung the night before, so they're sitting for 12, 13, 14 hours before he's touching them. The guy's got 10 rackets in his bag, so it's not a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think players are so good at changing rackets in matches that you don't ever see them break strings.
Mm-hmm.
So when it happens, people are like, what's going on? Why is the string breaking? But they don't realise they're probably using it for a little bit longer than they should.
So they could be using like 6 rackets in a match.
Yeah.
And then they will then get all of those strings cut out, and then
depending on the player.
And then they'll basically get a whole fresh batch of 6, for example, for a new match.
Yeah.
Most commonly?
Most of them do. Some of them try to recycle their rackets a little bit. So what they'll do is they'll string, say they got like 6 to 8 rackets. Some of them will only use 3 rackets. Everyone's different. So some players will use 1 racket per match, and if the racket starts to feel bad, they'll change because they don't like changing. Some players will use 1 racket per set. So they're only going to get 3 rackets or 5 rackets if it's a male in a Grand Slam. Some players are doing ball change. So you're going to need 6, 7, 8 rackets. And then some of them will have certain habits. So some of the players will drop, like Novak's 6 or 7 rackets at a time for a 3-set match. But he's preparing for different scenarios. So he'll string some at a certain tension and some at something different. And
it's marked, so he knows exactly which
they all
ones
have
which.
stickers in the throat.
Yep.
Something I like to do, especially when it's just something I've done, and it's something I did with Sam. I don't know why I started doing it, but I used to mark which racket I strung first, even if it's the same tension, because that racket's been sitting out longer than say they've got 4 rackets at 54. Racket 1 is going to be a little bit looser than racket 4 by the time I've strung it, because there's been 2 other rackets in that time strung. So I'll mark that was racket 1, that was racket 2, that was 3, that was 4. Probably best to start with 1 and work through them that way.
Super interesting. I want to dive into trying to get some tips for just the random person at home. So someone that's stringing their racket at home, or re-gripping racket, or maybe putting some lead tape on and just wants to kind of... They play a good level, they play a really good local level, they're playing tournaments. What are some things to really think about when stringing for yourself, or when kind of doing grip, or any of these things I mentioned?
So the first thing I always say to people, because I get heaps of people come to me and say, hey, I want to be a stringer. What tips do you have, or anything like that? The first thing is, the most important thing as a stringer is to be consistent. Doesn't matter if you're the best stringer in the world or you're the worst stringer just starting out. Whatever you're doing, make sure you're doing the same thing over and over. So let's just say I put a beginner stringer at a pro tournament, right? That's not going to go very well. But if that stringer is doing the exact same thing over and over, the player should work around you. So they might go, man, this thing's horrendous. It's so loose. They're just going to keep going up in tension until they find what they're happy with, right? But if you're constantly changing what you're doing, players and people will feel that. So my biggest advice for anyone, even if it's your own racket, just be consistent. So if you're tying off in a certain spot, make sure you do that. If you're using starting knot tensions, do that. If you're starting the racket in a certain way, start the racket every single time that way. It's funny, I remember when I was stringing it at the AO, like, I almost had this rule for myself. It's like, if I needed to go to the bathroom, I had to decide whether I was going to go to the bathroom before I started that racket, or I didn't, or well, that was a set of rackets, right?
Yeah.
So if I had 4 rackets and they're all the same tension, I'm not going to string one then go off to the bathroom. I'm going to string all 4, then go or find a gap, because you want them to be consistent. Or some people will start stringing a racket, they'll leave it in the machine, take a phone call, then come back to the crosses. They're dropping tension. So yeah, just be
that's
consistent.
Essentially a no if possible.
Yeah.
Just not to kind of like leave the racket on the machine.
Yeah, with tension in it. It's not good for the racket. The strings are dropping tension. They're going to be different. Just consistency. And then the other main thing is try not to lose tension. So make sure your clamps are tight. Make sure the bases are tight. Make sure when you're straightening your strings, there's tension on the string. Don't straighten it after. So if most people tend to get this like smiley face thing that happens, you would notice it. So the crosses end up going like this.
Yes.
So
as you go, you should straighten it up.
Yeah, while it's in the tension. So you've got the string tensioned. It's doing that. You pull it up with your fingers, use your straightening awl, and then clamp it. Don't let that happen and then straighten it afterwards because you're losing tension because you're moving the strings too much.
That makes
because
sense.
it's got to move much further distance versus when you've straightened it up and then you use the setting off all, it's only a tiny distance that you're actually moving it. Yeah.
Nice. Anything else with other equipment that people should be taking into consideration
Yeah, I think
off the tour?
Yeah, I think the other part is with the stringing part too. It's like a lot of people go, oh, so-and-so strings it for $10 in their garage and you're charging $30 at a shop or whatever it is. It's like, would you go to a doctor that hasn't started uni or just is in their first year and expect them to treat you the same way you would go to a doctor that's studied for 10 years? It's very different, right? So I think that's something that's not great at the moment is people don't understand the level it takes for someone to string a very good racket. So don't always go to the $10 person because it might not be great. They might crack your frame. They might lose a lot of tension. And that's where sometimes what happens is at the lower level tournaments, some players are used to having bad re-strings and then you do it actually properly and they come in and go, man, this is so tight. Like, it's not 54. And it's like, it's because we've done it properly.
Yeah, 100%. That's so true.
So you kind of get what you pay for.
Yeah, that's spot on. I stopped stringing my own rackets for that exact reason. Because I'm like, I'm not a good stringer and I don't care enough and I haven't invested enough time.
Yeah.
I want to give it to someone that really knows what they're doing to actually make sure that I'm getting a quality racket before my match or before a tournament, just to make sure that it's like, it's on point. Because I don't want to be messing around with that. If I can just make sure I get the right tension, it's just going to help elevate the performance. And I don't want to have to worry about that. I'm happy to spend the money because it's important.
It definitely is, and it's funny because people want to almost in tennis cheap out on the equipment.
Yeah.
But it's the actual part that hits the ball. So everyone's like, oh, I don't want to restring as much. I'll wait until the string breaks, or their rackets are really damaged. They've lost, like you see rackets where half the bumper's fallen off, and they don't realize, okay, that half of that bumper is probably 8 grams. Now your racket spec is completely different, and they'll use it. So, yeah. Be consistent. Same thing with your equipment, like your rackets. As they get damaged, replace them, change your bumpers, try to keep them the same, grip them the same, like all that kind of stuff.
It's just hard because it's so expensive, man. Rackets are crazy expensive.
Yeah.
If you're not playing and just getting deals and you're just like a regular intermediate to high level player that plays somewhat consistently, buying new rackets all the time is just impossible. And if you're someone like me that throws your body around the court and like scraps just to get the ball, to get the ball back. I've had to have like bumper tape on top because I just like throw my body around and try to get the ball back and I just destroy my frames. I'm like, I can't afford to do this, but then I throw the specs out because I need the tape on top. So it's like,
it makes it tough.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's like I've got lead tape on the top of my racket.
Yeah, that would add a lot of weight to the top of the racket.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially if you're someone that slices a lot and you get the side of the frame, the bumper doesn't go down that far. So that's a tough one. I think your rackets will just break over time doing that. But again, it's like, okay, as a player, like for young players, because some kids are doing that, but it's because they're not moving, right? They'll just slice a lot or hit the ground on the slice. It's like, move a little bit quicker, you don't have to hit the ground.
Or even just throwing rackets.
Yeah, like that. I mean, I've thrown the odd couple here and there in frustration. Started to learn how not to break them, but yeah, like in that case, it's like, okay, you've thrown the racket. They're not that strong. Like you can actually break a racket pretty easily. Like if I had a racket right now, I could probably put my foot on it and break it in here quite easily.
Yeah.
But the graphite is designed, it's really strong to last from hitting balls, but it's not designed for you to throw it and hit a fence or a pole or and a lot of the frames, they're a tube. Like I don't know if you've seen how a racket's made, but it's a carbon fiber tube that's then put into a mold. It's gone into an oven. It basically puffs up, and then they drill out the grommet holes and stuff like that from there. So it's graphite. So
that's so interesting.
Yeah, there's some videos online of it, so you can get it. I think there's some videos with like people going into the head factory and stuff where they show this like carbon fiber sheet that just gets rolled into like a really thin tube and it goes around this mold. So people got to remember like. The rackets, they're strong and they should last you a long time, but if you're abusing them, they're not going to last.
100%, like anything.
Yeah.
How are you and Tennis Lab changing the game in stringing performance? Is there any other way that you're innovating for the future with where the game's going? Is there any kind of insights that you can give to us on what you guys are trying to do at the forefront of equipment?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us is we're trying to educate our athletes that come in, right? So like we spoke about before with like picking which ball you're going to serve with, using different tensions for different weather. What court are you playing on? What's the court speed like? Who's the opponent you're going to play? Like there was one match I remember I was doing some stuff with Storm before she played Sabalenka a couple of years ago. And we're trying to work out what tensions she was going to play with. So we were like, okay, these are the tensions, but how are you going to play? You're going to let her, Sabalenka hits pretty big, right? Yeah. So the discussion was, she pushes you back, are you going to stay behind the court and be pushed back around the Melbourne side and try to hit from there? Or are you going to just stay on the baseline and try to take things early? Because that's two different outcomes, right? And what we were going to end up doing was if she was getting pushed back, it was like, okay, we're going to string a little bit lower so you can make up that distance in the court. And then if you're going to stay up on the baseline, you're going to need a bit more control, right? You're taking the ball a lot earlier, the ball's coming quicker, so we're going to string a bit tighter. So it's taking things like that into consideration. And then it just makes you a bit more confident on court. You know, okay, I'm going to change balls here. I'm going to do this with my racket. But something I'd always recommend to people is experiment with tensions and strings. Like if you don't like it, you can just cut it out. It's not a big deal, right? So something we do that I've done with Dash and Storm is I tried to work out what's the lowest tension that they can play with. So we kept stringing rackets lower and lower and lower until they're on court and they go, I can't hit a ball with this. So then we know, okay, this is your lowest tension. Then we did it in reverse, kept going higher and higher and higher until they go, can't hit with this anymore. So they know, okay, the lowest tension, for example, might be 42, highest tension's 52. So now they go, okay, depending on the weather, they work it out themselves. They go, okay, I know I can play with 42 and I know I can play with 50 or 52. They'll just string in between that range. So they've got, 44, 46, 48, like that.
Yeah. What should players be thinking about in different conditions? So for one that stands out is in winter in Australia, often people will go up to Darwin to play some futures or some tournaments where the weather's really good, 32 degrees, super humid. So super hot, super humid. What should people be thinking about when they're making a change to something like super hot and humid versus maybe something super cold like Victoria in the winter?
Yep. So that Darwin example, again, if you're being real like pedantic about it and more for a pro, it's like, when are you playing? You're playing at 1, 2 o'clock when the sun's on the court's super hot, or are you playing at 8, 9 o'clock, it's dark, it's just humid and hot? It's going to be a little bit different, so you can probably get away with your normal tension. But in that sunny example, you'd be putting it up. In a Melbourne in winter, are you indoor, are you outdoor, are you on Ontica? What do you want? Are you using dead balls? You'd probably string a lot looser. And people get scared when they hear 40s. I don't know why. I think it's just the thing where...
the 4 in front?
Yeah, it's just like I feel like almost even when I was getting coached, like my coaches used to say, what tension? 52, 54 or 50. I feel like those are the three defaults.
Always, yeah.
Right? So it's like you can string at 44, 46. It's actually not that loose. Like how many players go, and you coach, where they get a restring and they don't like it straight away. And if you ask them, okay, once you get a restring, at what point do you like it? And they might go, I don't know, after a week of using it or after 2 hours of hitting. And it's like, okay, that time is probably in the mid 40s, maybe low 40s if you're stringing at 54 or 55. So just get it strung at the tension that you like. Use it till it feels too loose. Chop it out. Most of the time you're probably going to break it and then just change it again. There's no need to string something way tighter and then go, it doesn't feel good, and put up with it and then wait for it to drop. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Is there any other technology that's coming out that you know of? Like you talked about university studies. Is there any other kind of study that you guys are doing? You talked about educating. Is there any vision that you guys have to try to change the game in any way? Is there any insights you can provide there?
Not really, in terms of like just that equipment space. Yeah, it's just like the Hawkeye court we have and the amount of things we can do within that court. Like we were talking about before, testing strings, testing tensions, testing racket specs, different rackets. So that process, if you're doing it with an athlete, can take a long time. Right? If you're going to get your racket like perfect with data, you need to do a test, pick a racket, play with it for a while. Then you need to have multiple rackets, and then we put different strings in it and see how they compare.
Yeah.
And then spec and tension and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot in there. But yeah, that it's pretty tough. Like there's a lot that you can do.
When a player comes in, how long is that testing period? Is it like a whole day?
No, so it's about 90 minutes. So
Okay.
basically you're going to hit about, I think we worked it out, it's about 3 sets of tennis.
Yep.
Almost. So you come in, you basically do 20 to 30 forehands cross court, then you'll do the same backhand, then you'll do your weapon shot and your serve, and there's anywhere between 10 and 12 rackets.
Okay.
So you're doing that with every single racket with your current, and then they get kind of mixed up into a different order. So you'll start with your current racket, you'll get racket 1, racket 2, racket 3, you won't know what they are, and then we
so they're all blacked out.
They're all blacked out.
Yeah, that's right.
You got no idea.
So you have no idea. Oh, that's good.
And
So
they're
you
all
actually
strung
don't-
the same
Yeah.
tension.
So no bias. You
Nope.
know, okay. Because
Right.
you might have preconceived ideas of what you actually
Yeah.
would like, or what you think you like, or even like the color, and you want to maybe even like this one more than this one.
And something I do that's quite cheeky, which I kind of just do to entertain myself when I'm testing, depending on the player, they'll go, no, I have to. Like, let's just say I got them on the court and they're really stubborn about their racket and their racket's perfect. I'll get their racket in our demo, the blacked out one, and put it in the test. And you'll be surprised how many times players will hit with their own racket that's blacked out and go, this one's not as good as mine, feels really bad, I like the other one of the other black ones better. And it's like, okay, so they're trying to be a bit more biased to their racket, but when you chuck theirs in there, they've got no idea and they're like, nah, this is no good.
Love that. It's sneaky from you.
And how much, like, you obviously charge them, right?
Yeah, so
how much do
at
you
the
charge?
moment, I think it's kind of changed. It used to be if you're top 500 in the world, in Australia, you could come and use the service for free. I think it might have changed to top 250 for singles. But then anyone that's ranked's got a pretty good discount. And then for I think for the public, I think it's about $6.99 for the 90 minutes. But there's like 3 people out on court running the session. It's like there's half an hour before where you're getting measured up. We're checking your racket specs. If you want, your racket can get strung at the same tension, same string as what's in all our testing ones. So there's 0 chance of any variables. And then you get this full report that's automated that I can run you guys through that we did for Tom, where basically you can look at each score for each racket and then kind of compare, and then you can come back and demo the top 3. So we let you borrow them again. We always recommend don't go straight off the data straight away. Take your top 2, play some sets with them, because you might like certain things better in one racket than another racket in a match scenario. But by that point, we've already worked out that those 2 rackets, regardless of which one you've changed to, it's going to be better than your current.
Interesting.
And then you sell them the racket.
Yeah, they can buy the racket from us, and then something we do is if you buy more than one racket, we'll customize and match them for free. So we'll fix the tolerance issues that happen from out of the factory. So if you bought 2 E-zones, which usually Yonex is unbelievable and they're like spot on, but say they're a little bit off, a couple grams here or there, we'll actually make them the same. So we'll match the swing weight, mass and balance. So there's no difference.
Nice. How many rackets are you stringing in a tournament? So 250 for ATP 250, WTA 250 or 500 or Grand Slam. How many rackets are you stringing?
I can actually tell you. Hang on. I'll tell you what we did this summer so far. I've got the numbers here. So here's our daily tournament count. All right, so Brisbane International, we did 1,410 rackets for that tournament. United Cup.
That's
Sydney,
for like, what, 8 days or something?
Yeah, United Cup Sydney did 567.
Yep.
The Challenger in Canberra did 657. Perth United Cup, which is obviously a lot shorter, 445. Adelaide at the moment, we're sitting at 782. And then the 250 in Hobart sitting at 276.
And this is all Tennis Lab?
Yeah, so this is Tennis Lab teams in each one.
Yeah.
And we've got like a software now that we're using that tracks everything. So players can then go from venue to venue. It's quite funny. They'll come in, we'll search their name up, we're like, same as last week. And they go, what do you mean? Like 54, 54? Like, oh, how do you know? Like, we've got it on record. So it's like super
they'd be
quick for
loving
them.
that,
They
yeah.
love that. But yeah, so sitting at the moment, we're at 4,137 rackets strung for the summer. We've still got a few days here and a few days in Hobart.
And that's only a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
So imagine the hours the guys are pulling, like the requests. Like you try to keep everyone happy. But yeah, I think stringers, people don't realize how tough it actually is.
Yeah, you guys are on a massive grind. Is it really profitable for you guys with the amount of hours, the amount of team, the amount of travel with equipment? Like, it would actually be pretty hard to move the equipment from place to place.
Not really. So the reason why we've started doing it, so it used to be in the past where tournaments, even like the Pro Tour ones you've seen yet, it's like a local coach or someone will do it. One, from a standard point of view for the athletes, machines are always different. The way the string is different. It might be a coach that just strings on the side and they've just learned to string while they were playing and might not be doing it to the standard of a challenger tour, as an example.
Of course, yeah.
So there's those issues that we're trying to upskill everyone in, because the industry is like, there's not really any training or anything in the industry. And then the other part is making sure the right machines are around. So basically we'll only use something that would be used at a Grand Slam or a professional tournament. So we generally use the Wilson Biata or the Yonex PT9. The head machine's an option, like one of those 3 big machines at those events, so it's consistent. So then that's one part of it. And then the other part is when the local person's doing it, they're wearing all the costs. And it's not really profitable. Even if you're paying someone per racket and underpaying someone who's helping you, like paying them like $10 a racket or whatever it is, it's a lot of costs involved. You need to get extra machines in. You might need to fly someone in because there's no locals around or any of that stuff. So it's not really fair on like the coach to wear that or someone local who's doing it. So we're trying to get rid of all of that, make it consistent, where the costs, make sure the player experience is really good, the standard's really high, and then at least now we can actually create a pathway for people that want to string. In the past, like for me, to string, it was like really hard. You had to know someone that knew someone to let you go and do an event. It was like almost impossible to string anything. So at the moment, we're working on a stringing accreditation at Tennis Australia that will launch this year. People can sign up, pay. It's all online. You do the course. There's like a few levels. Once you get to like level 2, level 3, you'll be able to string at these type of events. But then the goal is to have like a sort of like a job board, like the coaching one, where you can apply to do certain events in the year. And then people can do certain events and then go up to the next level and maybe do some events in the summer. So actually there's a pathway there for people to string. It's not really a job kind of for people that want to do it, right? It's almost like, I've just done it as a hobby. It's not really, I can't really turn it into a career or anything like that. So that's kind of one of the main goals, is to, one, create a pathway for people in Australia, make the thing really, really good for players, and then actually give back to the community. So we're actually almost training people, creating opportunities for them to actually want to do that. Like I said before, it's so hard for people to get into it.
That's crazy.
And there's not that many people that can string at that level too in Australia.
Yeah, well, for sure. It's pretty interesting that there isn't a pathway or any kind of accreditation that you can do. It's interesting that this is only just starting to be in place now. Yeah,
there's a couple overseas that are run by like private people, but there's none at any governing bodies, ITF, there's nothing like that. So we're going to do one, and then people can do that. And it's sort of more like the officiating, right? If you want to become a lines person, it's kind of like that. You've got to do the courses, you've got to go out and do certain events, get your experience up and that kind of thing. Then it creates opportunities for people. As we're in the past, it's like you got to know someone that's running that event, and that's more like how it is overseas.
Then you'd maintain the quality as well, because you can handpick the best stringers because they've gone through the system. You know which ones are the best, and then you can make sure that the quality's there because you're choosing the best strings for all the events that you're doing. Yeah.
So like for example, I remember the COVID year at AO. We really struggled to get people from overseas to come in. So I think we only had, at the time, we needed 20 stringers, and I think from memory there was like 10 or 11 people in Australia that could string at the event. So we still had to find 10 people from overseas, bring them in, quarantine them, all that kind of stuff. So the standards...
Bro, that would have been such a nightmare.
Yeah, so at the time I remember people were... we had the stringers in the same hotels as the players. Players were still allowed to practice. I can't remember exactly from it was so long ago, how many hours they could practice on the court, but they could submit rackets in. Rackets would get given to the player, the stringer in the hotel room, cleaned, all sanitized, everything was board. And then... the stringer would string it, get put back in another bag and all that kind of stuff. So it was a tough time, but that was one of the moments where we're actually, hang on, there's maybe an issue within this industry for stringing that it's not really looked at. So the goal is to eventually, maybe we could have enough people that could do a whole Grand Slam or could do all these tournaments and stuff like that.
Are you at that point now?
We're getting there. I think at the moment now we've probably got like between 30 and 40 people that we could use at like pro tours, challenges, something you could use at a slam versus that time. But again, like it's not enough people. There's a lot of events. I think there's like 18 or 20 events a year, plus the ones at the start of the year. Like to do 1,400 re-strings, you probably need 6 to 8 stringers working full time. Like just using the Brisbane one as an example, and you need them to be at a really high level. You need to be able to do 30, 40 rackets sometimes in a day at a really high level. And that's the hardest thing to train in people is like doing your first racket as good as your last racket for 100%. That long. And I think the biggest thing is you kind of mentally fatigue.
Of course you would.
And your legs hurt. You're standing there for 15 hours. You're behind this machine. I think for me, like it's funny. Like some stringers prefer to do batches of 6 or 8 rackets. They're just doing the same thing over and over. For me, I get bored doing that. So if I get a player gives me 8 rackets, I'm like, no. But I prefer to do like 2 or 3 rackets from one player, 2 or 3 from another one, because at least I'm looking at something different. But some stringers prefer to lock in. They've got 8 of the same tension, whatever, and just like pump it out. But yeah, it's a tough gig.
It's brutal. It's such a grind. How do you keep it fun in the space with the guys you're stringing at? Like, what are you doing behind closed doors just to kind of like, I don't know, get past the monotony of just continually doing the same thing over and over again?
You come up with some weird stuff. Like I know, like for example, in Perth, we had this like little chart we had going where it was like every player we were stringing for, if they won a match, we got like a point. So we're like getting competitive. We're like, all right, my player's playing your player. I'm going to get a point here. Or sometimes you end up with 2 of your players playing each other. Like, yes, all right, guaranteed a point. Or you do stuff like that. Or you have the tennis on. Or you just, towards the end of the night, you just start laughing. You start like making jokes. It starts getting pretty fun. Like, you need a good team. Otherwise, it's a pretty tough gig if you're not having fun while you're doing it.
100%. Yeah, it would be a nightmare if you're not with good people that you can have a good time with. Just be in that space because you're doing long hours. Yeah. It's brutal.
So any players listening to this, make sure you hand your rackets in early. Be kind to the stringers because they're doing long hours.
100%, yeah. It's like being kind to the people at restaurants that are making your food. And the people, it's the same things. Like you're not going to treat those people like crap because they're the ones serving you food and they can do whatever they want to it. So if you really want to, be an asshole to the stringers, then look out because they can actually derail your performance if they need to.
No one's ever done that, but
we don't want that. But definitely be kind because it's brutal.
Yeah.
So I just want to kind of wrap up. But one thing before we wrap up here. How is Tennis Lab making their money mostly? So is it through the kind of Hawkeye system where people are booking in? Is it through just the shop of just selling a lot of equipment? You're saying like running these events isn't super profitable, but what I'm guessing you get out of it is a huge network and then people who then filter into the other services that you provide because of your reputation that you're building through the tournaments that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So how does it actually work from just like a financial model for you guys?
Yeah. So obviously like it's run by Tennis Australia. So we're trying to upskill the industry to improve the sport, right? So everything we're doing, we're trying to make the sport better. And that's the goal. So anything I do, that's the vision. So like even with this stringing stuff, like we were saying before, it's not that profitable. But that doesn't matter because we're upskilling stringers. We're creating this industry where people can choose like another job path. We're making the experience better for the players and all that kind of stuff. And then in terms of like where revenue comes from for the lab, like we do the Hawkeye testing. The revenue comes in for that. We do stringing in the shop. We sell some rackets, the customizing piece. But again, like we've got full-time staff that are in the team. So all that kind of stuff covers that. It's not like it's making crazy money or anything like that. It's just basically Tennis Australia is a non-for-profit, right? So
and a lot of that money comes from the Australian Open as well.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff funds these kind of projects and things like that where we're trying to improve the sport. And like I said earlier, there's no one else anywhere in the world with a permanent Hawkeye court where we can do this stuff and try to make our athletes better. And we're trying to put it out there in the community, and get people coming in and testing and stuff like that. And like I know the price sounded a bit expensive, but like obviously Hawkeye is not cheap.
No, not at all. So it doesn't sound expensive for what you get out of it and the potential changes you can make.
Yeah, and when people see the report and how much work goes into it, and like I said, like with our Hawkeye setup, like if we had a couple of extra cameras, it's literally the same thing that's on RLA. So you could run challenges. It's actually used for some of the other stuff for players, so they can, sometimes they'll turn it on and they'll play matches and analyze matches in practice and things like that. So it's used for other things too. But yeah, so that costs a lot to run.
Of course.
But yeah, we've got 3 people out there on the court. So usually I'm out there measuring your rackets, we're checking them, you're getting follow-ups, we're matching any rackets that you choose to buy. Sometimes we help players get some sponsorships. We'll put them in contact with some of the brands if they're, ranked highly enough, or if we could get them a partial with a discount. We're doing a bunch of other things. But yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, it makes me want to get tested. I might have to come to Melbourne on that Hawkeye court and try a bunch of rackets, and you can black out mine because so many of the frames are just destroyed anyway. I wouldn't care. And see what's going to be good for me, because I've been on the hunt, and some of these changes I think would be good for anyone, just to kind of really lock into getting the right racket for them and where they want to go with their game. So thanks for coming down today. Really appreciate it. Super interesting. This is a whole world that I don't know much about, and I think a lot of people can take a lot away from understanding this part of the game, which I think tennis players do poorly at. And I think it's going to be really valuable for people just who want to get that little bit more of an edge and find out what equipment is going to be working for them. So really appreciate it. Thanks for taking out time, because I know you're super busy, and wish you well over the Aussie summer.
No worries. Thanks for having me.